Since Daggerheart launched, I've seen a ton of reviews from Dungeons & Dragons players and people that are a fan of Critical Role's previous work that are getting into the system. As a result, I've been seeing a lot of takes on the system that I think are missing some key points. Oh, sure, there are of course others out there that are picking up on it pretty quickly, but there are so many that are delving into Daggerheart and trying to play it like Dungeons & Dragons. But here's the thing, Daggerheart is not supposed to play like Dungeons & Dragons. It's an RPG with narrative support tools, and for anyone that watches my channel, you know that is the type of game that I play. Cypher, Fate, and many others along the same vein. Games where the GM and players both have the ability to affect the narrative in impactful ways. And frankly, Daggerheart easily falls within it. It's actually probably within my realm of likes because it does credit games like the Cypher system as direct major inspirations. Now, before I get into things, I do have to start off by saying I didn't think I was going to like Daggerheart. I was in one of the earlier playtests of the system with a bunch of other YouTubers, but it was sort of a crash course and I didn't really get the system or its benefits at that time. I'm also not a die-hard fan of Critical Role. I did watch Campaign 1 nearly religiously because I was going through one of the hardest moments of my life at the time, and it was a great amount of escapism for me when I needed it most. But I didn't really keep up with them after that. And frankly, I think Candela Obscura was not only not a game for me, but objectively badly designed. My buddy Taryn, Indestructiboy, did a well-received video where he went through how the system was even missing critical functions and didn't operate very well. I'm sure they've fixed it since, but it's still not the game for me. With all that being said, I went into Daggerheart with a negative mindset. I'd go so far as to say maybe I was even a little prejudiced against it, but I picked up the PDF anyways, just to give it a go. So I think that should stick with you, that even though I was set to be overly harsh with the system, it still won me over. I now have the PDF, the digital content, and 2 physical copies. It was perfect timing for my IRL group to switch to since we just stopped our previous campaign, and I'm even running a one-shot for a bunch of people from the Cypher Unlimited community on my Discord. Am I, quote-unquote, switching to Daggerheart? No, because I don't switch to other systems, because that would imply I've dropped a system. Anyone that knows me knows I always say that more RPG systems in your library is like more tools in your toolbox. You don't have to permanently switch from a screwdriver to a hammer. It's useful to have both. So without further ado, let's go through the major points of Daggerheart and what I think about it. Firstly, let's start where I usually do, presentation. I do this because I work as an artist and layout designer in the industry. So obviously I tend to be critical of how a product is presented. If I had to give this a score out of 5, I'd give it a 4. The art is incredible, absolutely. It's all polished and wonderful in many ways, although I will say a good chunk of the art falls within that safe blandness you'd see in a lot of major products these days. There are some incredible standouts for me, but the majority of the pieces, while technically good and beautiful, don't always inspire that much emotion. But I will say that Daggerheart suffers from this much less than games like Dungeons & Dragons, where they play it very, very safe. There are many more pieces within the book for Daggerheart that do instill something wonderful or mysterious or emotion-filled for me. Even the pieces that do have a bit of that bland safeness still have some sort of action or interest going on within them. I would describe the layout of the book in almost a similar fashion. It's not something that blows me away. We're not talking Morkborg or Dragonbane or other products that go a little harder with the elements of their layout design. It's safe, it's readable, and it works. They check the right boxes to make it as readable to as wide of an audience as possible. It has good font choices, great spacing and kerning. It's not justified text, which is always a bonus, although I will say there are areas where a little extra effort to make it look good could have been put in had they wanted to. Odd areas of a little bit too much white space, for example. And we all know I actually normally like some white space in a layout to give you room to breathe. Also, I know this is a text-dense book that is filled with as much art as humanly possible, but part of me feels they could have done a 10-point font instead of a 9-point by just incorporating a few less pictures. Hey, 9-point font is readable enough. I've certainly seen worse, with some RPG products using 8 or even 7 as their base text. But my 41-year-old eyes that have been staring at computer screens for far too many decades probably would have appreciated a slightly bigger font. Never mind anyone with vision difficulties. My players in my groups range in ages from 20s all the way to their 70s. Needless to say, a couple of my players have a hard time reading some of the text, especially the text on the cards, which as far as I can tell is a 7-point font. Now, before anyone comes after me and says, oh, well, I'm sure there's plain text downloads for the SRD and plain text cards, maybe with bigger fonts, but I'm not reviewing those other resources or going and hunting them down. I'm just reviewing the core product as is, treating it like someone that just bought this box off the shelf and took it home to play with. Next, we're going to go into ease of access. How and where can we access the content? This is another area I'll give a 4 out of 5, fully recognizing that this is only going to get even better with time. At launch, you can buy physical products, although they did sell out. I think this exploded even bigger than they anticipated, so it's not something they're at fault for and is easily fixed. So I still judge ease of access for physical copies as very high. PDFs can be found from major sources where you would expect no problem. I was hoping for a little more support in VTTs, especially that of Foundry, which is something you're seeing becoming a bigger deal all the time as people become frustrated with parts of Roll20. Right now, there is a digital character sheet in the form of a Demiplane Nexus site. It has several options available for free there, along with all the options unlocking with the purchased keys. Frankly, if you're getting the digital PDF, you can get the PDF and Nexus together for not much more. The Roll20 setup is being worked on, but is not yet really fully functional, and there's been zero response about other VTTs. There are developers ready and waiting to do a Foundry setup, but last I heard, they were getting nothing from Darrington Press and can't seem to get any feedback or contact at all. Considering a large portion of games these days take place online, supporting VTTs is almost as important as physical prints. Actually, for quite a few crowds, the digital VTT content may even be more important because people with distance issues, accessibility problems, or disabilities may rely on VTTs to assist them in playing these games. But in the end, there is some digital presence, a good character builder, and quickly released card builder on their website, and it'll only grow with time. This is why I still give them an above average score of 4 out of 5. Okay, now let's get into the bread and butter of the system, its actual mechanics. Yet again, I'm giving an above average score, 4 out of 5. I like some of the core concepts so much, I almost gave it a 4.5 out of 5, but there are some oddly crunchy bits that seem almost out of place with the design concepts of the game. So we're going to stick with a 4 out of 5, which is still above average. Here's where I think my focus in playing mostly looser narrative games comes into play versus reviews from those just coming over from things like D&D and Pathfinder. This section will be a bit longer because I don't want to just review what the book has, but why I think there's some frustration by some of those new GMs and players. Firstly, let's tackle the primary resolution mechanic and the hope and fear dice. I must admit, at first, I was kind of reluctant about this. I've not been a fan of some of the dual dice systems that I've seen, like the Modifius 2D20, which is kind of funny since my own Void Home game I've been tinkering with technically has a dual dice system kind of like this for years now, actually. The fact that Daggerheart also has a success and failure decoupled from the possible narrative impact with hope and fear, even if it does it in a different way, means I just had to like it since we're going in the same design direction for a reason. So the hope and fear dice really has grown on me, and I consider this a positive for the system. Next, I want to tackle a real big one that I think a lot of D&D converts are missing out on that players of narrative games, like myself, are catching on to a little bit quicker, and that is GM moves. A lot of these D&D converts that I see, when they talk about the GM getting to make a move, instantly gravitate towards how they can spotlight an adversary. In fact, I've seen people on Reddit concerned that the adversaries are getting too many turns, but I think it's because they're looking at the GM moves like they would look at monster actions in D&D. But that's not what the GM moves are. And I think the GM moves are very clearly stated in the book what they are supposed to be. But a lot of these new GMs and a lot of these new players are making assumptions and skimming over what they actually are. Take a look at this list of 16 example GM moves. I'm trying not to show too many full pages of the rulebook or anything when I can help it. This is a freely available sheet, so I don't think it's a big deal. Out of that 16 examples, how many actually involve spotlighting an adversary to attack? That's right, 1. Only 1 out of 16 moves spotlights for an attack. A GM move is not a combat turn like a traditional RPG. A GM move is meant to be a narrative tool to help the GM mechanically decide the ebb and flow of the scene as it unfolds. It lets the GM add the "and then" of their improv narration, while still having a mechanical basis to make it a game. It can spotlight an adversary to attack, but it can often do so very many other things as well. For those that play narrative games, a GM move in Daggerheart plays out a lot like Complications from Fate, or a GM intrusion from the Cypher system, except the GM is basically always doing them whenever they get to act. And even then, this is a little free form, because although the GM is encouraged to do GM moves off of certain trigger points or when spending fear to do so, it's also in the rules to do it just when it feels right for the moment, as a golden opportunity. Put all this together, and the GM moves are influential narrative choices that usually happen within triggers, not a simple NPC combat action, and I think this is why I am seeing quite a few people frustrated with that aspect of the system. Like the complaints I've been seeing about the bad guys getting too many turns, it's not because the system is imbalanced, it's because you're trying to run it like a completely different system. These people have made the assumptions about how it plays out and not followed the examples and guidelines given in the books. And it does clearly spell it out in the book, but first you need to do what my buddy Dean from the Cypher Unlimited community always says. First, you must have your paradigm shift and realize this game plays different. This also plays into the lack of an initiative system, something I'm already used to doing, to be frank. I've been running loose group systems or narrative turns for years at this point, and my players don't really seem to miss it at all. By incorporating some trigger points for the GM moves, I actually think Daggerheart does this even better than many other designers, myself included, have achieved. I know players from more structured systems that may not be sold on it yet, and may want to incorporate a more traditional initiative system. But trust me, just try it out for a while. You'll be amazed how fast you not only adapt, but learn to love a looser narrative action system. Another point to make on this being a looser narrative system is that narrative does not mean it's light on rules and mechanics. I'm not sure why people started to equate the two. My favorite system with narrative support tools is the Cypher system, and I would not call that a light system by any means. Not super crunchy, but there's a lot going on. Daggerheart is kind of the same. It has remarkable narrative control, but it is not a light system. I'd say it's much lighter than D&D, but even D&D is on the crunchier end of the rules mechanics spectrum. No Pathfinder or Palladium, but it's up there. Now, let's get into some of the reasons I think there's some odd choices in the design. The game itself plays quick and smooth with a very heavy narrative slant towards your actions. And then you have the absolutely strange decisions to make the damage, thresholds, armor, health, in the different manner that the GM rolls all come into play. I don't hate the systems by themselves. but they feel strange when compared to the quick simplicity of so many other aspects of the system mechanics. It feels a little like a quilt, where most of it is one type of fabric, color, and pattern, but there are a couple of odd patches here and there made from Grandma's bright red cartons that look very different from the rest of the quilt. The quilt still works, and may even have a certain unique charm to it, but it's obvious that parts of it stand out as not belonging to the initial design. Then we get to the adversary design rules, where the primary resolution mechanic with the hope and fear points are meant to be these quick narrative streamlined things. The adversaries suddenly feel like they're being ripped straight out of 4th edition D&D. There are some guidelines on adversary design throughout the appropriate section, but I feel like more is needed. It feels needlessly complicated. I hate to compare it to another system, but that's how humans usually relate to things, by comparing it to things that we know. Cypher is very similar in that it is a moderately crunchy mechanics, heavy narrative RPG. But GMing that system is absolutely easy mode, made in part by how easy it is to make stat blocks. In Cypher, you just give something a difficulty number and everything else kind of falls into place except for what you want to specifically tweak or modify. For example, there are full-page stats of some creatures, but if I need to suddenly have a player fight a wolf, it's as easy as saying, the wolf is level 2, has a modification, easing its attacks by 1. Done. That's it. I know the default health of that creature, how its defenses work, how fast it is, etc. Because the system is designed extremely streamlined when improvising threats. Daggerheart almost gets there. Yes, in many cases I could just say, difficulty 14 to overcome this threat. But if I want an actual adversary for them to go up against, I feel the design involves far more steps than it should. The guidelines it gives for a new GM are not great. In fact, look at this graph. I had to plot this out because the book doesn't do that good of a job telling you the baseline numbers of the different adversary types at each tier, and I wanted to see what the average was when designing my own. I feel like the core book needed to do one of two things here. Either simplify the way adversaries and environments work, like how Cypher does, or provide much needed comprehensive sets of tables and numerical points for a GM to follow the stat block design if they want to do this more crunchier method. Now, let's end the system mechanics section with what I think is another positive. The cards and tokens as part of play. I've seen a real mix of feelings towards this, but I would like to add that the cards and tokens are not required in any means. The cards are just an easy way to use and reference what every other RPG already has, a suite of abilities for your characters. In fact, in the last Pathfinder 2nd edition game that I ran, I actually printed a lot of the abilities for some of my players as cards, just like this, because they were confused and found referencing the cards much easier. I do wish the Daggerheart cards weren't formatted so that only someone with the eyes of a 10-year-old could read it comfortably, but for some players they really do help in gameplay. And for those players that don't like cards, don't play with them. They aren't needed. There are sheets to write down your abilities, just like all the classic RPGs. Or do what us old-timers used to do if you don't have a fancy sheet. Use a piece of paper and a pencil. Trust me, it's worked for decades so far. But these play aids are great, because it saved me work of making these optional assets myself for those players that do need it. Alright, let's get to the next section. This is about the setting. I'm going to give this section another 4 out of 5 or above average because Daggerheart doesn't have one tight setting to work with, but it does present ways to incorporate campaign settings in a really great way. I play a lot of universal systems, RPGs that have no strict setting or have books within it to grant some specific settings to work with their universal rule sets. I know. There are those out there that say,
I hate universal systems. They always feel so bland compared to RPGs with a specific setting.
But those are often the same people who go on about how they love products like Boston or the Alien RPG, both of which use the universal system of the Year Zero engine. Or even worse, they'll go and play D&D 5e, which is exactly what they just said they hated. Daggerheart does what a lot of universal systems have done for years, but in what I think is a well-presented and tight package. I am of course talking about the framework system. I think the way this is presented is streamlined, easy to understand, and easy to replicate for your own uses. I applaud the way this is presented and would probably have given this section a 4.5 out of 5 if it wasn't for the fact that the rest of the options in the game do kind of seem like generic modern high fantasy. The classes and ancestries feel like the same old stuff with a coat of paint slapped on. This is a benefit in some ways. It gives us a familiar baseline to work within this system, but it's not exactly inspiring either. This is why I give it a 4 out of 5, which is still above average, just not exceptionally so. My conclusion. Well, my gosh, I feel I could keep going on, picking the system apart piece by piece and giving my thoughts and the pros and cons. There's a lot to unpack here. I can see myself doing more Daggerheart videos in the future. I'll be honest, I went from being kind of prejudiced against the system, wanting to hate it, to being head over heels impressed and loving it. I give it a final score of 4 out of 5, or above average in quality. This is tough for me. Part of me wanted to push this score a little higher. The average baseline quality these days is astounding for RPGs. The stuff coming out of companies like Free League and Monty Cook Games and Runehammer, or indie publishers like Underground Oracle, Jason Cordova, Terran Pounds, is all frankly mind-blowing. This means to be above that average is to have to make a pretty damn good product, and to make something with some thought, care, and love that isn't just slapped together to make a paycheck. And I believe Daggerheart was made with some real good intentions behind it. Do I agree with all of their mechanics choices? No, but I don't think there's a system out there that I would. Every system has its pros and cons. But that's the beauty of these games over video games. You can easily tweak them, house rule them, homebrew, even mix and match. And Daggerheart is a great example of a system that is an interaction upon already existing concepts in a great new package. I actually laugh at how many of these reviewers say, "Whoa, check out this brand new thing just created for Daggerheart," when those of us that have been around the block realize not much of it's actually new. But that's okay. That's how innovation works. Design is inherently our iteration over the designs of the past, building upon the old to make it bigger, better, and feel new. And that is what Daggerheart is doing. It is the designers at Darrington Press saying, "Although we stand on the shoulders of giants, it is only so that we can reach that much higher." This is an above-average game with a ton of potential, and I do believe this has almost instantly risen to be one of my top systems. If you like what I do, don't forget, give a like and subscribe, and of course, maybe check out my Ko-fi, drop a couple of bucks for this Canuck for some brewskis. I wouldn't say no. I'd very much appreciate it. And as always, stay healthy, stay safe, and have a good one, eh?